My name is Daniel, I'm 26 years old, and if you asked me to describe my life in one word, it would probably be routine. Not bad, not extraordinary, just a steady rhythm that plays out the same way, day after day. Most mornings begin with the smell of coffee drifting through my small apartment. Not the kind of fancy coffee you see on TV, just plain black, slightly burned if I forget to pull the pot off in time. I sip it while leaning against the kitchen counter, staring at the cracked tile on the floor, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator. It's quiet in the mornings. Almost too quiet. By afternoon, I'm usually in the garage, where I work part-time fixing engines and tuning old cars. The sound of metal against metal, the whir of a drill, the sharp click of tools sliding back into their cases, it all blends into a soundtrack I know by heart. Grease clings to my fingers no matter how many times I wash them, and the smell of oil seems stitched into my clothes. It's honest work, but it leaves me drained, my back sore, my mind empty. When the sun goes down, the world outside slows, but for me, nights are when the silence hits hardest. My apartment feels bigger than it really is when it's just me inside it. I'll sit at my desk, laptop glowing in the dim light, scrolling through emails I never answer, half reading articles I'll never finish. The ceiling fan above creaks with every turn, and the ticking clock on the wall feels louder when the rest of the world is asleep. Sometimes, I catch myself listening for sounds that aren't there. Footsteps in the hall. A voice calling my name. Anything to remind me I'm not completely invisible. But all I ever hear is the echo of my own breathing. I tell myself I've gotten used to it, the solitude, the predictability. And maybe I have. There's a comfort in knowing what tomorrow will look like, even if it's a mirror of today. Wake up, coffee, garage, dinner, laptop, silence. A cycle without surprises. But deep down, I know I'm waiting for something. Something to break the pattern. Something to remind me that life isn't just a loop of empty rooms and cooling cups of coffee. And until that night, I didn't realize how quickly everything can change. How a single sound in the stillness, a door opening at 2 a.m., can shift everything you thought you knew about your world. Because before she walked in, my life was simple, predictable, and painfully ordinary. The silence was all I knew. The silence before the storm. It was one of those nights where silence felt heavier than usual. The kind of night where even the ceiling fan seemed to drag through the air slower than normal, and the glow of my laptop did little to keep the shadows away. I remember staring at the blinking cursor on an empty document, thinking how even the machine seemed to be mocking me. Midnight had already passed. Coffee sat untouched on the desk, cold and bitter. I had resigned myself to another night of nothingness, when it happened. At first, I thought I imagined it. A faint sound, soft, almost hesitant. A creak on the floorboards outside my door. My chest tightened. No one came here at this hour. No one ever came here at all. Then came the whisper of a knock. So quiet it was almost polite, as though whoever stood on the other side wasn't sure if they even deserved to be heard. I froze. The walls of my apartment, usually my safe cocoon of silence, suddenly felt fragile. My first thought was that it was a mistake, someone looking for the wrong door. But then, just as my hand hovered near the doorknob, I heard it. "Daniel!" A voice. Soft, uncertain, almost trembling. My name, spoken like a secret. I opened the door. She stood there in the dim light of the hallway. Emily. 22. I knew her in passing, the kind of neighbor you nod to when taking out the trash, the kind of person you recognize but never really see. But in that moment, she was different. Her eyes, God, her eyes told a story before her lips ever moved. Red-rimmed, heavy with exhaustion, as though sleep had been a stranger to her for weeks. She clutched the sleeves of her oversized sweater, pulling the fabric tight against her body like it was the only thing holding her together. "Are you alone?" she whispered. There was a pause, long enough for me to notice the way her voice cracked at the edges. Long enough to feel the weight behind those 3 words. She wasn't just asking if anyone else was inside. She was asking something deeper, if I had space, if I could listen, if I would allow her to step into the quiet world I kept so carefully guarded. I nodded, stepping back. She walked in slowly, every movement hesitant, as though afraid she'd break the air between us. The sound of her footsteps across my floor was unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. She didn't explain why she was there. Not yet. She just sat down at the edge of my bed, her posture both fragile and tense. She avoided my eyes, tracing patterns into the fabric of her sleeves with her fingers, like the silence between us might swallow her if she let go. And in that silence I knew, this wasn't just a late-night visit. Emily wasn't here to borrow sugar or to make small talk. She was carrying something heavy, something hidden, and for reasons I didn't yet understand, she had brought it to me. The storm had arrived. At first, we didn't speak. The silence between us felt sharp, like glass. She sat on the edge of my bed, still clutching her sleeves, while I stood a few feet away, unsure of what to do with my hands, unsure of what to say. It would have been easier if she had come with a reason, an excuse about a blown fuse, or needing to borrow sugar, anything that made sense at 2 a.m. But she didn't. She just sat there, her shoulders tight, her eyes fixed on the floor, as if speaking might shatter something fragile inside her. I turned toward the desk, picked up the forgotten coffee mug, and without thinking asked, "Do you want some?" She looked up, startled, as though she hadn't expected kindness to be offered so simply. After a long pause, she nodded. I poured what was left into a fresh cup, heating it in the microwave. The familiar hum filled the room, breaking the silence for a moment. When I handed it to her, her fingers brushed against mine. Cold. Shaking just enough for me to notice. She wrapped both hands around the cup like it was more than coffee, like it was warmth she had been searching for. We sat in the dim light. Me in my chair, her on the bed. Two islands separated by a small space that felt impossibly wide. She finally spoke. Her voice was soft, cracked at the edges. "I couldn't sleep." It wasn't an explanation. Not really. But it was a start. I nodded slowly. "I don't sleep much either." She glanced at me then, just briefly, and in that flicker of eye contact, something unspoken passed between us. A recognition. Two people who carried silence differently but understood how heavy it could be. The conversation didn't flow like water. It staggered, hesitated, broke apart in awkward pauses. But there was something alive in those pauses. The way she traced the rim of the cup with her finger. The way my eyes lingered too long on the curve of her tired smile when she let it slip. We didn't talk about big things that night. She mentioned her notebook, said she carried it everywhere but rarely wrote in it. I admitted I had folders full of half-finished thoughts on my laptop, things I never had the courage to share. It was small, almost meaningless. Yet, in those small details, the room felt less empty. At one point, she laughed, quietly, suddenly, at some clumsy comment I made about how coffee after midnight should be illegal. The sound was short, fragile, but it lingered in the air like music. For a moment, I forgot the hour, forgot the weight of the night. And as I sat there, watching her shoulders loosen just slightly, I realized something. It wasn't the coffee, or the words, or even the laughter. It was the silence between them. A silence that no longer felt heavy, but shared. That was the beginning. The first thread of connection, woven not with grand gestures, but with small ones, shaking hands, lingering eyes, and the quiet relief of not being alone. The first night could have been a one-time thing. A moment born from insomnia, from loneliness, from the strange gravity of silence pulling two people into the same room. But it wasn't. She came again. Not the next night, but soon enough that I found myself listening for her footsteps in the hallway. At first, she'd slip in quietly, almost apologetically, like she wasn't sure she had the right to be there. I never asked why. I just made room. One night it was coffee again. Another, it was tea. Sometimes nothing at all, just the two of us sitting in the glow of my desk lamp while the world outside kept sleeping. The visits began to stretch longer. What started as small talk, half sentences about the weather, or the noise from the street outside, grew into something else. She told me she hated hospitals, not just the smell of them, but the way they always seemed to hold bad news. I told her I hated birthdays, how they reminded me of people who weren't around to celebrate anymore. Her voice would soften when she spoke about the past, as if sharing it out loud made it fragile again. She told me about promises that had been broken, about nights when she'd stayed awake staring at the ceiling, trying not to remember faces she had lost. I didn't try to fix it. I just listened. And in return, she listened to me. I admitted things I'd never said aloud, the way loneliness felt less like an absence and more like a shadow that followed me everywhere. How sometimes I pretended to be busy, even when all I was doing was waiting for the hours to pass. The silences between us grew heavier, but they didn't hurt anymore. They settled into the room like a blanket, warm and unspoken. Sometimes she'd write something in her notebook while I typed on my laptop, and neither of us would say a word. But the air was different now. It was no longer mine alone. There were small moments, too, that stayed with me. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. The way her laughter came suddenly, unexpected, like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds. The way her eyes lingered on me when she thought I wasn't looking. Each visit blurred into the next, until it no longer felt accidental. She wasn't just dropping by, she was choosing to be here. And I was choosing to let her in, again and again. It was fragile, yes. As if one wrong word might make her retreat into silence forever. But there was something rare in the way we shared the nights, an unspoken trust, a quiet recognition that we had found something neither of us had been looking for, but both desperately needed. And as the hours slipped by, as dawn painted faint light across the blinds, I realized something simple, something undeniable. The silence was no longer empty. It was full of her. It couldn't stay simple forever. Nothing fragile ever does. One night, Emily didn't come until much later. I'd already given up waiting, already convinced myself she wouldn't show. When the soft knock finally came, I felt relief. But the moment I opened the door, I saw it. Her eyes were different. Guarded. Distant. She stepped inside, but her silence wasn't the comfortable kind anymore. She kept her arms crossed, her shoulders drawn tight. I tried to fill the air with small words, but they fell flat. Finally, she sighed, her voice low. He called me. I didn't have to ask who. The way she said it told me everything. The ex. The one she had only ever hinted at in fragments. Someone who had left scars in places I couldn't see. Someone who still lingered in her life like smoke after a fire. I felt something sharp twist in my chest. Anger, maybe? Fear, definitely. Because in that moment, I realized how easily this could vanish. How quickly her footsteps in my hallway could fade back into silence. She explained, half-hearted, almost apologetic, that it wasn't what I thought. That he was just checking in. But the way her voice cracked, the way she avoided my eyes, told me there was more. Ties not fully cut. Wounds not fully healed. I wanted to ask her to stay away from him. To stay here instead, where she was safe, where she was seen. But the words caught in my throat. Who was I to ask that of her? I wasn't her savior. I wasn't her anchor. I was just a man with coffee cups and sleepless nights, clinging to something delicate I barely understood. And yet, the fear of losing her was real. It gnawed at me in the silence that followed. But the conflict wasn't just hers, it was mine too. A part of me whispered that this connection was already too much. That if anyone found out, my family, her friends, they wouldn't understand. They'd question why a man like me was sitting in the dark with a girl 4 years younger, letting her heart bleed into the night. The fear wasn't just about her leaving. It was about what it meant if she stayed. That night, we didn't share stories. We didn't laugh. We just sat across from each other, two people tangled in their own shadows. I could see the war in her eyes, the pull of the past against the fragile thread of the present. And I felt my own heart torn in two, the part that wanted to reach out and hold her, and the part that warned me I might lose her anyway. The room was heavy, thicker than smoke. For the first time since she'd walked into my life, the silence hurt again. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just a connection anymore. This was a risk. A fragile, terrifying risk that could shatter us both. The nights after her confession were different. She still came, but something unspoken hung between us. Her presence filled the room, yet her mind seemed far away, trapped in a tug-of-war I couldn't see but could feel in every glance, every hesitation. I tried to act normal, to keep our fragile rhythm alive, coffee, quiet talks, long pauses. But the silence was no longer soft. It pressed against us, demanding something neither of us was ready to say. One night, she didn't sit on the bed. She went straight to the window, her back to me, her hands gripping the curtain like it was the only thing anchoring her. The streetlight outside painted her in pale gold, outlining the tension in her shoulders. I watched her, waiting. My heart beat louder than the ticking clock. Finally, she spoke, her voice so low it almost broke. "I can't do this anymore." The words struck like a crack of thunder in a storm we'd both been pretending wasn't there. I stood, but I didn't move closer yet. "Do what?" I asked, though I already knew. She turned halfway, her eyes shining with tears she tried to hide. "Pretend. Pretend I'm fine. Pretend I'm not haunted. Pretend I come here because I'm just bored." Her voice trembled, raw. "I come here because I need to. Because you're the only one who sees me when I feel invisible everywhere else." The room went still. Every word she spoke landed heavy, like stones dropped into deep water. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Emily." She shook her head, gripping her sleeves tighter. "But it scares me. It scares me how much I want to be here. How much I don't want to leave. Because every time I start to feel safe, I remember how easily it can be taken away." Her breath hitched. "And I don't know if I can survive losing that again." The silence that followed was deafening. My chest ached with everything I hadn't said, the nights I'd waited for her knock, the fear that her absence would hollow me out, the quiet truth that she had already become part of me. I took a step toward her. Then another. My hand shook as I reached out, not to grab her, not to hold her, just to bridge the unbearable space between us. My fingers brushed hers, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. "I can't pretend either," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I don't know what this is, or where it goes. But I know that when you're here, the silence doesn't hurt anymore. And I can't go back to the way it was before." She turned fully then, tears slipping down her cheeks. Slowly, she placed her trembling hand into mine. The contact was simple, but it carried everything, the fear, the longing, the truth we had both tried to bury. And in that fragile moment, nothing else mattered. Not the past. Not the risk. Just two people standing in the quiet, finally admitting what silence could no longer hide. That night didn't end the way the others had. No half-hearted goodbyes, no lingering silence that stretched until dawn. This time, something shifted, something broke open, and neither of us could pretend anymore. We stayed by the window for a long while, her hand still in mine. At first, it was a fragile grip, like she might slip away if she held too tightly. But gradually I felt her fingers relax, the tremble fading into something steadier. She looked at me, really looked, and for once, there was no wall between us. The room was hushed, but it wasn't the kind of silence that hurt. It was the opposite. A silence filled with meaning, with the echo of words we didn't need to repeat. I don't know which of us leaned closer first. Maybe it was both at the same time. But when our lips finally met, it wasn't fireworks or thunder. It was something quieter, deeper. A careful kiss, soft enough to feel like a question, certain enough to feel like an answer. When we pulled back, she let out a shaky laugh, pressing her forehead against mine. "I didn't think I'd ever feel safe again," she whispered. I brushed her hair back gently. "Maybe safe doesn't mean never being afraid. Maybe it just means not being afraid alone." She smiled at that. A real smile this time. Small, tired, but alive. We didn't sleep. Instead, we walked. At 3 in the morning, the streets were nearly empty, the city half asleep. The glow of the streetlights stretched long shadows across the pavement, and our footsteps echoed in rhythm. She walked close enough that our arms brushed with every step, but neither of us pulled away. We talked a little, about nothing and everything. About how she used to sneak out as a teenager just to watch the stars, about how I used to dream of leaving this city but never did. But mostly, we walked in a comfortable quiet, side by side, as if the world had finally slowed down enough for us to catch it. When we reached the corner where her path split from mine, she stopped. For a second, I thought she might turn away without a word, the old fear pulling her back. But instead, she reached out and took my hand again. "I don't know what tomorrow looks like," she said softly. "But I want to find out. With you." I squeezed her hand, feeling the weight of the moment settle in my chest. "Then we'll figure it out. One night at a time." The air was cool, the sky just beginning to pale with the first hint of dawn. And as we stood there, holding hands under the street light, I knew this wasn't the end of our story. It was the beginning.